Welcome back to your therapy strength training. So if we're having an injury or just feel some imbalance, this would be some good stuff to incorporate into your workouts. You don't have to do it the whole time, but if you're definitely dealing with some sort of injury, you can reapply these things to whatever you're doing. Today we'll just be working solely with the kettlebell, and you want a kettlebell that's light enough where you can hold it in this upended position. That's kind of the test there. If you can take that and then just drive it overhead, and that's not too, it should be a little tough to get it up there, but if it's, falling over like that, it's too heavy, that'll be a good gauge for you. Definitely test both sides with that. Get it up there, can you hold it in this position? And can you get it up overhead? So you want it a little difficult, but that's kind of the test there. And you might even notice, hey, left to right was a little tougher. And throughout all these exercises, if one side's tougher, it's harder, you're getting more burning in the muscles, especially here in the rotator cuff area. We're gonna repeat that side. We're still gonna give a little bit of love to the right side, but it's good to, especially if there's torsion or twisting in the spine, we wanna work on one side over the other to bring balance. So that when we're doing our workouts, we don't have to think about it in the future because we'll be more balanced. So we'll just start out with some breathing. Feet about shoulder width apart. That grip strength has a lot to do with that rotator cuff. You're just kind of relaxing there in the elbow. You want to bring that out, and you'll start to feel that burning a little bit there. So let's just do 10 breaths. Big inhale through the nose, kind of lengthen, get that tailbone tuck. You can breathe out through the mouth. Kind of counterbalancing a little bit with that right arm, because that weight's just going to want to come in there, so you want to hold yourself up. Especially with the breathing. One thing you should be kind of feeling is that psoas muscle in through here. Fighting to hold that spine relatively straight. If you got a mirror, that's a good thing, and be able to see, okay, I'm a little off center, I need to get that shoulder higher, whatever it is. Good, get some breaths in there. Lengthening. Think about driving your feet through the floor. So we're getting length in our neck, length in our spine, expansion in the rib cage. I'm not pulling my shoulder blades back. I'm actually expanding the rib cage first, and then I'm thinking about retracting a little bit, opening up the shoulders. And that's going to give love more to the posterior delts and those external rotators of the rotator cuff. All right, next we'll do a little trick here. We're going to take that right foot, go big toes together like that, and we're just going to take this left kettlebell on the inside thigh. Might be a little tough. Dorsiflex that left foot, and you're just going to kind of drag up and down a few times. Big problem with the rotator cuff is getting our hips underneath us. So retraining those hips to work properly. That knee driving in. It's going to be a little tough to hold that. Try to get 5 of those. At the top there, we're just going to let that weight kind of fall into that, straight-legged, one-legged Romanian deadlift. Try to find that tension in the hip. It's not about getting all the way down if you have to round your spine to get there. So you're just finding that tension. That's going to look different for everyone. For me, it's not going to look too pretty. Find that steadiness. Because the last thing we want is to lose that rib cage expansion just to get deeper. My right leg has always been my weaker leg. That's why I'm going to work on that one more today. And you want to be shaky in the stance here. The more compressed you are, the more balance you're going to have. So keep that length, keep that expansion, and you're going to have trouble with that, and that's good. Next, we're just going to do overhead press. The gripping the kettlebell, keeping that wrist straight is going to hit the rotator cuff more, help it strengthen. If we open hand or we extend the wrist too much, it might look better, might be able to get the arm back farther, but we're going to overwork kind of the anterior portion of that rotator cuff. So let's just start here in that rack position. Get that elbow straight. Lengthen that spine, push the feet through the floor. Big inhale, exhale, drive up. As a lightweight, so it might be easy, so just make it harder by keeping your spine as stiff as possible. Might feel like you can't straighten your shoulder all the way. That's okay. It's more important you keep that wrist straight. Keeping these flexors engaged the whole time. Shoot for about 10 of those. Starting to get a little burn. Good. It's really shaky, so let's hit one more. Good. I'm also feeling that along my back there, because all those muscles are trying to balance, because that weight wants to bring me over to the left, so the whole spine is fighting to keep me central. So we're going to try a little bit of a row, high pull, and then just going into that clean with a kettlebell. This is probably going to be a little more sloppy, but that's okay. Just trying to be as strict as possible, but still getting that hip motion. So instead of doing the swing where we kind of round the spine, we're gonna strict hip hinge, high pull, and then bring it up overhead. Let's do 5 of those. Really get that hip hinge. If you need to back away from the bell, that's fine. Literally jumping with that kettlebell to get underneath it. A little sloppy there. And the more you do these, they're not going to be as pretty, so. Again, keeping that wrist locked out at the top. We're not doing one of these. You can see how I'm really extended there. I can get that arm farther back, and it's actually more comfortable, but I'm just resting on the joints. Good. Let's finish with that upended. We'll try to get 5 of those overhead. Whatever you want to do. If you want to do a split stance, that feels more comfortable. Let's try that. So rack position. Not rack position, sorry, upended position. And then, that's kind of hard in the split stance. All right, try the last one in the split stance. Rotator cuff's already pretty fatigued. I can't do it. That's good, that's what you want. You want to fail. Let's go over to the right side. Repeat that same little exercise. Run through it again. Breathing to start. Notice the difference. Still feeling that pull, but I can just feel less garbage and restriction in my spine here. Definitely tell this is my stronger side. Long breaths, expanding the chest, lengthening the neck. Get 5 to 10 of those. And then we'll do that little just trace with the heel. Dorsiflex the foot. Coming up there. And down. Should feel that inner thigh. Adductors working. Shoulder really not doing much here. I just like this trace because it sets us up well for that Romanian one-legged deadlift. So here we brought that hip up. It allowed us to engage our psoas. So when we bring that leg back, we're trying to keep that engaged so we find that tension earlier. Again, bringing that leg up, heel back to the shin. If you keep that tension, like that's where I just let go. Can you see how I just sunk in a little bit? I'll show you from the side. It's got the engagement. We're going, we're going, we're going. And I want to get deeper. I let that go. That's when we lost that. And that's when the spine is going to curve. Here, we've lengthened, got the spine where we want it. Keeping that engagement in the hip. Spine straight. Gonna feel impossible to straighten your knee out, but that's good. Let's do an overhead press. Rack position. Wrist straight. Get the rest of you straight, like you're pushing through the floor. We're not doing a lift with this one. We're trying to just keep that length. Breath in, lengthen. Exhale overhead. Breath in, lengthen. Now these first few, you're probably not going to feel that burn. You might feel some restriction in the shoulder blade and all that. That's what we're trying to limit. Is too much shoulder blade movement. That glenohumeral joint, getting that more isolated motion. Everything else kind of locked in. There we go, good burn. Definitely, I was able to do a few more on that side before the fatigue. Let's do a little bit of that row from the ground. I like to incorporate that hip hinge whenever I can. Good hip hinge, tension in the hamstrings, but also here, tension in the erectors, stretching, not engagement, stretching, lengthening. So bell a little bit out far in front of us. And you're gonna high pull, then bring it overhead. If this one's hurting you, don't do it. Good. Let's end with that upended kettlebell. We'll try the split stance for this one. Part of the problem is it tends to get slippery. Still tough, but I was at least able to do one. Something I'm gonna have to work into. It's easy. You're doing something wrong. Let's do one more. After you run through that whole gamut, getting that last, that should really be stressing. At the beginning, you could tell, not too bad, a little shaky, but it was easy. That's how you've known you've really worked the rotator cuff, because it's lost its stability. Rotator cuff's job is to simply hold this humerus in the socket. The same thing in the hips. There's muscles that hold design, not for a lot of motion. Rotator cuff helps with motion, it assists, but mainly its job is to hold it in. Same with the hips. They compress it in the socket. Just as we were doing at the beginning, we're compressing those shoulders in the socket. That automatically will lead to length of the spine. That weight's just helping us out a little bit. The more we add weight, our hips will automatically come underneath us to allow us to drive upwards, and the shoulders will engage. And that way we can work those rotator cuff muscles equally. Because normally, most of us are turned in, where the supraspinatus, subscap are overworked. They're internally rotating that glenohumeral joint, and teres minor and infraspinatus tend to be weaker. If there's a really tight short muscle, there's often an overstretched muscle, and that's what's kind of prone to spraining. Especially doing a lot of overhead stuff, that infraspinatus tends to get damaged because there's just not enough space there. So we want to keep that shoulder down. We don't want it rising up where it's pinching in that acromial space. So that's why we want to keep as much length as we can in the neck and the shoulders pulled down. And then, because a lot of people think good shoulder motion, flexibility, well, not necessarily stability. We want to lock even the shoulder blade in place. So that's not moving, it's just that joint. And you'll notice, hey, I'm hitting the wall here, but if I let that go, I got a lot more degree of motion. So you can play around with that. Another good thing is a theracane, just kind of, hey, lock the top of the shoulder blade in place. Okay, yeah, that's hard, because then it wants to hike. It wants to use those upper traps to help pull up. The spine wants to help out. And it's good to use that range of motion. We're more powerful with that motion, that flexibility. But if we're relying on it all the time, that's when we get injuries. Just like we talked about the pelvic floor before, we're just rebounding off the joints all the time instead of slowing and pushing through. That can lead to some damage. And it's also training us to move improperly. We need, when we're walking, we should be not relying on our flexibility, but walking with stability, sitting with stability. The things we do a lot, breathing with stability, instead of breathing from our shoulders all the time, where our hips aren't engaged, the pelvic floor isn't using that Valsalva pressure to get that breath in and then drive it out, all from our diaphragms, the diaphragm here and the diaphragm of the pelvic floor working. And that's really, kind of the breathing is the cure for the rotator cuff. A lot of injured rotator cuffs. And it's not that they're doing the wrong exercises, it's their approach. You know, they got their bands and they're there like, yeah, I don't feel it. But as soon as you train them to kind of hinge and lengthen the spine, automatically they'll feel, okay, now it's starting to burn. So it's not about doing 1,000 reps here. It might only be 10 good, really controlled. TheraBands are great, kettlebell's great. It's all what we're doing. Finding that tremor, that shake and that resistance earlier in a position instead of trying to always stretch the problem out or trying to strengthen the problem out. Let's focus on those weak rotator cuff muscles, not trying to stretch what's tight. That's good too, that'll give you relief. But if you never address the inhibited or the weak muscle, you're not going to get anywhere. The problem's going to come back because we have to strengthen. We have to stabilize the joint. And that's going to help everything else. So rotator cuff problems are hip problems in disguise. They're spine problems in disguise. We need to think about the whole body. And that's why I like doing kind of weighted exercises. It includes working everything together. The feet and the hips are working with the spine to work that shoulder out. So if you noticed left to right was tough, I want you to run through this whole thing again on what side felt weaker. For me, it was the left side, so I'm gonna go do that again. So try that at home, just run through that. And nothing special about these exercises, just some ones that I like, that I came up with. I really just like that upended one. Definitely do that one just to test it before and after. If the weight's too heavy, you know, you got your 24 kilogram, probably no way that I'm gonna be able to really, I can get it there, but pressing it, not gonna happen. So you know you need to drop down. I might have even could have gone a little bit lighter than this one, just because at the end it was so tough. And I think eventually working into that split stance would be really good. Gauging those hips, driving up overhead. And then you can apply that to your foundation training, because once you get better at this, foundation training is gonna make a lot more sense. Foundation training, we're doing that same thing. We're pulling those shoulders into the sockets. We're pulling the hips, as they call that, anchoring. It's just hard without weight. It's hard to feel it. Once you've kind of trained yourself there, you can find that same resistance even without a kettlebell or any weight at all. It's just you've taught yourself, connect your brain to these little muscles you don't use a lot. These, usually the tiny muscles in the spine, tiny muscles in the rotator cuff. They're more, tendinous, coverings. Not really much muscle there, but we can definitely activate it and build it up so we're less likely to injure these joints all the time. And that's the goal. You shouldn't be going heavy. Just because you can go heavy doesn't mean you should. And you might not feel it the first time, but down the road, if you keep going that way, you're going to run into trouble. You're going to run into injury. So if you're hurting after a workout, try some of this stuff next time. Don't skip, don't wait a whole week like, oh, I need to recover. Get in there again, just go lighter and think about more isolated motion. And that way you're not missing any days. And then you can start building back up, hitting your records, getting your new PRs. All right? Dr. Klein out.